Well, hello, folks. I'm Dave.
I'm Sean.
We are Barstools
And Bandtalk. Yes, I'm being interrupted. Take the friggin' chair and get. Oh, your laptop. Yes. Yeah, sorry about that hawk intro. Good to see everybody. I didn't take my customary drink.
I did.
So, nothing but the best. Just had somebody come into my shot here and steal something out of my office. But enough about me. We've got a guest tonight that so obviously everybody knows we've highlighted musicians, we've highlighted all kinds of different things, and we've highlighted those people in the background that really aren't in the background. They're so important. Without them, there's no us. And we have a barn burner here tonight. Mr. Bruce Nelson hooked us up with Mr. Dale Lynch, and we're not even going to let the cat out of the bag. We're going to let him talk about himself. But this is a dude that very highly regarded in the world of music, in the world of arts and entertainment, and we're happy to have him.
Yeah, we're excited about this one here because he has worked with the best of the best, and we're, again, to Sean's point, we're not just about musicians. We want to tell the whole story, and not just music. We're talking about entertainment. So, Mr. Dale Lynch is now not the entertainment that you think. It's not like it's not like the rides and roller coasters. It's a different Dale Lynch. Okay, don't kid yourself.
That's Bill Lynch.
There we are.
This is Dale Lynch.
This is Dale Lynch. Dale, how are you, sir?
Doing great. How are you guys?
All the way from balmy Hamilton, Ontario.
Balmy, yeah. The southern Ontario.
That's right. So you probably didn't hear our intro, but what we said was that on our show we featured all kinds of different people, all kinds of artists, everything. And some of the people that never get their due is the people that aren't in the background. They're the people that actually should be in the foreground because they're running the show. They're doing all that stuff. That would be you to a T. And Mr. Nelson kind of gave me a little bit about your background, but we want to get you on here to talk about Dale Lynch. So with no further ado, my friend, here we go.
Did he tell you I'm old?
No, he said you're handsome.
Yeah.
That I don't believe.
Well, Bruce is a great guy. So tell us a little about yourself. Obviously, you're a little bit of downtime right now with everything going on. But up until that point, what was your muse, if you will? What were you up to?
I was all of last year and the beginning of this year, I was out with Michael Buble as his tour manager and tour accountant. So I'm kind of doing double duty on it. It's a bit of an odd animal in terms of being tour manager. You take on a bunch of different duties depending on what the artist is or what the scope of it is. We were 22 band that we traveled with. Wow. And so we had a band road manager as well. And then Michael had a personal assistant that took on some of the duties that kind of I would traditionally take on, but she traveled with him kind of all the time. She was beside him all the time. And that kind of freed me up to do all of the advance work and do all the accounting and settle all the shows and do that kind of stuff on a daily basis as well. But yeah, we started up tech rehearsals last January, and we finished up. Our last stint was in Australia, New Zealand, got home end of February, and then the COVID thing shut us down from a bunch more legs we had planned. Yeah.
Right.
So from a local perspective now, Dale, a lot of folks would remember Steve Hennessy working with Michael Buble.
He's still there. Yep. He and I didn't know Steve when he was in the maritime scene. By the point at which he came into the Razor Boy thing, I was already gone. And I worked with Broken Toys and Klick for their whole lifespan. So we had gone away about 1983, I guess, and traveled across Canada and came back for a stint at one point where we had planned on taking basically a month or a couple months off, do some rehearsing, get some new songs in the bag, and then and go back out. While we were doing that, we were rehearsing in the area where, and I'll never remember the name of the area, although my parents live there now, Portland Street, kind of where the big grocery store is.
Yep.
Right where Sean McBride lives. So that area with Landrace Crescent and.
Oh yes.
That's where I'm right across the street from that. I'm in Portland Estates, so I know exactly where it is.
So right on kind of the grounds where the grocery store is, there used to be what we call the chicken coop. It was this little kind of hut before they built any of that. And we were doing some rehearsals in there. And Sean was walking over, obviously, because he lives so close. He was walking one day, he walked into a crosswalk, 3 lanes of the traffic had stopped, and a car came straight through the crosswalk and nailed him.
Wow.
And it took the mirror of the car, broke a rib or ribs, and severed pretty much everything except one membrane in one of his main feeds to his heart. So they rushed him to a hospital. He had heart surgery, had to have his heart repaired, and went on a recovery for about 6 months while we were supposed to be rehearsing. And so it kind of shut the band down for a little bit. I ended up going out with a band called Risque, who had Pam Barr and Francine Shea singing for it at the time.
Oh, okay.
While the band was waiting for Sean to recover, and they just kind of went into writing mode and rehearsal mode. And yeah.
I never heard that
That
story
story
before.
about Sean.
That's
Well, and I'll
crazy.
tell you, on a different sort of somber note, there was a young lady who I went to school. Actually, Dave and I both went to school with her mom. She was killed in that crosswalk.
Dangerous crosswalk.
Yeah, she basically same thing. She was walking across. Cars were stopped. This woman pulled out to kind of jump the shark, if you will, and just perfect timing and hit her. And she basically was unconscious, and they took her off life support the next day. So I mean, that's just so you know, that's a crosswalk that they're always trying to get rid of or do something with. So hopefully someday we see that.
My own aunt and my cousin were hit the same spot. They lived in Portland States. It's a wicked spot in Dartmouth. It really is.
Yeah.
I never heard that story before, Dale. I never heard that story before about Sean.
And I've known Sean a long time.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
I've known Sean a long time.
Sean was, at that point, I think he was running about 5 miles a day. He was seriously healthy, and the doctors, from what I remember, say that's part of what saved him. Is he was so healthy. He literally picked himself up, crawled to the curb, and they called an ambulance and pulled him in, and he was having troubles breathing. And so they decided to stop at the hospital in Dartmouth instead of bringing him over to Halifax, and inserted a tube for breathing. And that's when they discovered all the issues with the rib and the heart, and went straight into surgery. And it was about 6 month recovery.
Well, and
what year would that have been?
Sorry, what was that?
What year would that have been?
That would have been either late 84 or early 85.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'll Sean's we're gonna have him on the show. He and I have been kind of talking. I've known him for a long time, and he truthfully, and he doesn't know it, but he got me through high school, because when I went to Prince Andrew, and Dave and I were both playing in bands. I'm a drummer myself, and I put little, if any, effort in. And the guidance counselor always talked about how she worked with Sean Kilbride to, hey, get through school to have something to fall. And honestly, God, my whole grade 12 year, that was the speech I got. And but I used to get to spend a lot of time with him, because he was always around when Haywire wasn't playing, and I just always picked his brain like you wouldn't believe. So great guy. Yeah,
he came into the band. The band was called Klick originally, and he came in. I think he was our second drummer, if I remember correctly, and then kind of carried through the whole time as into Broken Toys, and through it as until the end. The band finished up late 85, so mid-December, something like that. And he went straight to Haywire from there.
Yeah,
I just recently played in a band with Glendon McBurney as well. And
Glendon, he came in on the last run. So we had a guy named John Boswell was our bass player for the bulk of the time. And we had, as a band, we kind of ventured out of the Maritimes. So back it was probably 1983, we left home and packed our truck and a van with the musicians and our gear, and we didn't come home for a year. We went out west, and we gigged and rented a house in Calgary at one point for a month, and rehearsed and wrote songs. And I was a sound man at that point.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And and we literally just ran our own business for a year, going across the country, and then came back, did a big show, kind of a return show at the Palace. And that was John Boswell's last show. And then Glendon McBurney came in as the bass player when Sean was injured, and rehearsed into that. So
there you go, Dale. Who knew that story? Now, I wanted to hear more about Michael Buble and what you've been up to, but wow, that's a cool little hometown.
Well, so fast forward a little bit. So I mean, now Broken Toys, was there not? Did I not? Or do I understand that they kind of maybe broke up when they were out west and kind of disbanded away from here? And is that is that the gist of it?
That's about it. I mean, we were out. So after the rehearsals and after Sean got healthy again, we did basically did the same thing. Packed up the truck and left for a year, and went back out west trying to make it as a band. We had some interest from the Bruce Allen office. There was a guy named Cliff Jones who was the manager of the Payolas, and he was working out of Bruce Allen's office. So we did the band did some demos at Mushroom Studios out in Vancouver. But kind of through the run of it, we were gone for another year. They decided that the December was going to be the end of it. They'd finish up in Vancouver and then shut her down. And so at that point, the singer, Gary Gillespie, he and I went to high school together. A gentleman named Pat O'Brien, who you guys know.
Yep, very well.
Went to high school with Pat. Anyway, Gary and I, at the end of it, decided we were going to move out to Vancouver. So we came home for a couple of weeks, and then January 1st of 1986, we flew to Vancouver, and we already found a place, so we moved into the place, and I started working out of Vancouver for a bunch of years. And that's kind of where I got into more of the road work. So I went from, as I was doing sound, there was a lighting company called West Sun Lighting that was doing a lot of big corporate shows after Expo 86. And so they needed extra people. So I started jumping in and doing kind of local calls in the day for this lighting company, and then mixing bands at night. And at one point it got so busy at West Sun, and I got let go from one band. And so I decided that I would pursue the lighting thing because it was always an interest at the same time. And I started working strictly out of the West Sun Lighting Shop and doing touring. And so, yeah, back in the early 90s, I think one of my first tours was Robert Cray and Tom Cochran back in the day. And started kind of touring, doing lighting crew chief stuff mostly back in those days, yeah.
So, and that end of the business, correct me if I'm wrong, obviously ability and talent is one thing, but being well networked is probably equally as important. Is that a fair statement?
Well, it helps. I mean, it certainly at the beginning stage, the lighting company wasn't big enough that they had a lot of guys, and so they were really looking for guys that would be roadworthy, that they knew they could trust out there with the contract.
Right.
And so, kind of in the same way that I saw the interview with Peter and Roy Mambercat, and where Peter would kind of have a list of guys he would want to call to put on the tour. I became one of those guys. So I kind of worked out of the office for a while. Just if I was around town, I'd do local stuff, and if there was a tour going, I would jump on the tour.
Right.
But even pretty early on in the lighting stuff, I knew that the company was going to get an interest in moving lights. The technology had started coming along. Very Light was still the only one with a moving head. And so I approached the company and said, look, if and when you guys get moving lights, I want to be one of the guys that trains on them. And so shortly after, they signed a contract with Very Light. And I went in and trained on the Very Light systems and started doing some touring with the Very Light stuff, where I was the operator and technician on tours. And
that was some big names then, I'm sure, Dale, eh? That would have been big names.
Strangely, it for me, because I was one of two guys in Canada that had the training at the time, I did a few things. So we had some out on Tom Cochran. We had some of the VL1s. And then there was some other stuff coming along. But at that time, a gig on a show called Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Starred Donny Osmond.
Right.
This opening came up. It was a union contract. I had done a bunch of local calls in Vancouver for the union, so I had my card out there. I mean, the 80s in Vancouver were busy. We were working all the time. So any of the big shows that were coming through any of the big cities, I worked them. And then eventually this opportunity came up on Joseph, and it was going to sit down in Chicago for 17 months.
Wow.
And they called me and asked me if I'd be interested. So I took it. And I ended up staying with that theater production for 3.5 years.
Wow.
So I was with it from about mid-93 until 96, I guess. Something like that.
And what a great city, eh?
It was a great city. And we did, because of Osmond, we had really, really good schedule for a theater schedule. So we had, good days off. We didn't do a typical theater schedule. And we did long stints in cities because the show was just a cash cow. I mean, it was so popular. So we would do, 6 months, 4 to 6 months in most cities. Chicago, we did the 17 months. We went back for 2 other stints of 12 to 16 weeks.
Wow.
After that, and in the 3.5 years. So yeah, I did 6 months in Boston. I did about 5 months here in Toronto one time and met my wife here and then came back for another 4-month stint. And
Nice.
yeah, and then moved back into the music stuff after that.
Okay, so here's the thing, and you were running the lights. You were a guy that was doing it. How do you make the transition? Because I got to think that again, I'm a drummer, and like Dave and I have been doing the show, and it's been fun and all that stuff. I don't know when I would be able to sort of step back and not be a drummer right now in my life. But obviously, you did that. You went from being a lighting person to running a show, being a tour manager. You mentioned a tour accountant. So what was that transition like? Because that, to me, that's almost like, Dale, yeah, you're standing behind the soundboard or the lighting board, but we can't have you there. You got to be over here, right? So what was that like? How did that come about?
It's an interesting progression. So you kind of, the one thing I can tell you about Canada is that once you get into the side of budgeting tours, you start to realize pretty quickly that budgeting for another bus ends up costing you a lot of money over the run of a Canadian tour and what you can potentially make for income. And so a lot of those tours are looking for people that can multitask. And so through the run of kind of doing lighting, I started doing some lighting design and lighting operations. So I worked a design for Diana Krall, and I did some stuff for Norah Jones early on.
Nice.
Some other stuff. Anyway, the progression of kind of getting to the point where I worked with Jesse Cook at one point, and it was a Canadian tour. And Jesse's, amazing, incredible guitar player, but not mass marketed. So, you're playing places where you can't really afford to have 2 or 3 tour buses. So we were on one tour bus as a band and crew. And so I set up the lighting, I operated the lighting, and I was the production manager. And that came from kind of the connection of just the guys that I knew in the Macklin Feldman world saying, look, can you do this as well? And by that point, I'd already, done enough with Diana Krall, with their production manager and with their tour manager, where they were saying, you probably need to think about getting out of the back of a truck because you're starting to get a bit older and you could be a tour manager or production manager. And so I just started kind of delving into both of those different worlds, and I still do both. It depends on the act. So it kind of was a natural thing of, look, we need somebody to do 2 jobs, and also a couple of guys that pushed me to say, you should get into tour and production management.
Now, Dale, did you ever play yourself? Or are you a musician yourself? Or?
Well, I did one show. So very early on, I knew 2-finger bar chords. So Gary Gillespie taught me a 2-finger bar chord, and we formed a band in high school. So it was myself and Gary and a guy we called One Beat Whitey. His name was Dwight Giles, and he knew one beat. So we called him One Beat Whitey. The 3 of us had a band, no bass player. We had kind of rehearsed 7 songs that we knew, 2 guitars, and Gary sang. And we played, I can't remember if it was a 16th birthday party or 18th birthday party of one of our buddies in his basement. Well, the basement had 200 people in it.
Wow.
I mean, it's like a little trap door. You could get into this basement, and it was packed. And at some point, there was somebody there that decided Gary was a good singer, and he should be recruited into another band. And that band was a band called Equus. Or was it? Yeah, it was Equus at the time, and Pat O'Brien was in that band.
Okay.
And so Pat had recruited Gary, and they became kind of friends and formed a band around that, and I became the sound man kind of through that process.
And Pat went on to sing with Gary's little sister, Laura.
He did, yeah. And Pat and I are great friends now. We kind of reconnected after a lot of years. We, because I was moving all around and, lived on the West Coast for a while.
Right.
I kind of lost touch with Pat. And then I was down in Halifax visiting at one point. My folks still live in Dartmouth.
Oh, nice.
And they live on Landrace Crescent, the same.
Oh, what number? I'm going to go over and knock on their door, have some supper there.
Yeah.
Actually,
late
you know
life.
what? Did you grow up in that area?
I did not. So I'm an Air Force brat,
Okay.
and I moved to Halifax in the summer of 1977, and started JL Leslie. I lived in Spryfield. I did my 3 years of high school, and then I did 1 year of architectural drafting at I guess Halifax Vocational School at the time.
Yeah.
I was
Okay.
going to get into engineering. So I was going to do a 2-year course and go into college for engineering. And that summer, kind of the progression of the different bands that had happened, it had become a Klick, and Ron Hudson had decided he was going to put them on the road. And so they came and said, look, do you want to come on the road with us and do sound?
That's
And
wicked.
so I left school and never went back. I've been doing
You know,
it ever since.
it's funny because like that area, there's so much, like, so there's the, you know, I mean, you have roots there. Kilbride grew up there. Mike Johnson, who was coach of the Pittsburgh Penguins, his parents lived there.
Oh, funny.
Like, and Landrace, when Dave and I grew up, Landrace Crescent was where all the rich kids lived because there was no poor.
I just lost internet, guys.